All right. Hey, everybody, welcome to Journey More Often, hosting along with 1723, the American Wine Journey series. This is podcast number 4. It's hard to believe this is the 4th one that we've done, and we've already got next year, we've already got some things planned out for that. But right here with me is
Cody.
Ben Cody of
Co-owner of
1723.
1723.
Yeah. Okay. Wait a minute now. All right. Now I got 3 going on. So we're recording with 3 devices. That it always works well that way, just in case one fails. It's always good to have a fallback. But today's discussion is going to be about what makes a good wine. And there are a lot of things that go into a good wine, and we all like a good wine, but the question is, what makes a good wine? So let's get started and talk about, let's talk about the varietal selection.
Sure. I was going to say, well, what makes good wine is the one you like, but that wouldn't make for much of a podcast. We wouldn't have much to talk about.
I think that's our final bullet point, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so look, there's lots of things, and we're going to talk about each of those. I think it starts with a concept. Starts with varietal selection, and of course, in France they have this concept of terroir, which is this notion of a sense of place and how that sense of place creates a unique meld of all these elements that ultimately result in a wine that you can only get from that place.
Like literally, you see these villages, and the villages are demarcated with the different fields.
Yep.
And some fields are half an acre.
Yep.
But that field yields some of the most fantastic wine, and it's about the terroir. So it's about the terra firma that people understand. And what's cool about that is that it really does have an effect on what the wine tastes like. So you can't just plant.
Yeah, it's a lot of trial and error. I think that's the thing that where Europe is, where we've had to work through a lot of things, and Europe's had an advantage of, in many of these places, they've been growing wine there for, since the Roman times, and so they figured out what works and what doesn't. That, when you're a first generation wine producing region like we are here in Pennsylvania, for that matter, most of America, there's a lot of trial and error that's involved. I would also say too, the French really emphasize this concept of terroir, and they talk a lot about soil, and certainly soil is a component of it.
Right.
But science, I'm a big believer in science, and with this notion of terroir, there's a little bit of storytelling involved too. But when you break down the science,
right,
so much of it is the weather.
There's a reason.
The weather.
There's a reason.
Science would say the weather has an even bigger impact than the soil, but that does create that concept of place because the weather is unique to that place.
Exactly, and it's how the weather affects the soil as well, because
Sure.
they're combined. I saw there was a really cool vineyard in the Oakland region in California, and it was basically almost rock. So, but it was little rock, like pebbles or So all these, and I saw I saw a picture of the vineyard, and it's unreal. You're looking at it and you're going, how can the plants even grow in that? But what made it so interesting when you're talking about the weather is unique to the location. They got, coming in from the sound, they got a straight breeze coming in, and it was full of humidity, and it was literally perfect for growing wine there. And it was almost accidental because they had wine all over the place, and one just kind of grew up out of the
Well, that's what gets back to what the varietal selection, which is where we started here. You just got to pick and choose what works. In humidity, right. In humid environments, some of these varietals work well, and Pennsylvania is humid, so we've figured out what works here. Some of them do not, So
and
a lot of trial and error.
Trial and error is the big key, and like you said, the Romans really they nailed it down. They took the science to the next level and did a lot of the work for us.
Well, certainly did a lot of work for the European vineyard sites. I wish they'd been here to sort some of this out for us.
Couldn't they have conquered the?
We've had to learn what works here and what doesn't, and obviously we've talked on previous podcasts about crossbreeding American and French grapes and how that's been a cornerstone of success in the industry here, and how that's actually, even some of that's going back the other way, back to Europe, in the sense with the focus on sustainability that we talked about last week, how important it is to find varieties that are far more disease resistant and don't require as much of the sides, pesticides, herbicides.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that yesterday.
In fact,
yesterday.
Since then, there's a renowned consultant here on the East Coast named Lucy Morton, and she is actually working on bringing some of those original hybrids, one called Cunningham, back to the U.S. They're still grown in pockets in France, even though they're technically not legal.
Wow.
And so there's a huge, the future ahead of us is just fascinating in the sense that you'll see a whole different set of varieties come into play both in Europe and here, just because sustainability is playing such a big part, and we'll get to go figure that out all over again about what works well and which location.
Right. Yeah. So in the varietal selection, is big on that. When you pick a certain grape and you try and grow it and it just thrives, that's awesome. But when you pick another grape and you try and grow it and the yield is like 10% of the other one,
fruit gets rotten, and it, just to compound the complexity, I think we've talked about on this show before. The rootstock, what the vine that's in the ground is different than what's growing on the top. So you have to match the rootstock to the soil, and then you have to then go match what you want to grow on top of the rootstock. And not all varietals, such as Merlot or whatever, Chardonnay, they don't all match well to rootstock. So you've got to find a combination of rootstock and technically, viticulturists would say cultivar. We use the term varietal, but they would say cultivar. You have to match the rootstock with the cultivar, and then hopefully make all that work out.
So that's
lots of trial and error.
That's a new technique that I guess a lot of people don't realize, is that there are there's the ground, the terroir, there's the rootstock, and then there's the actual vines themselves, and there are three different, or can be, and you have to make sure that they all are symbiotic and they all work together.
That's that rootstock selection so key. Like in that place you're talking about out in Cali, they would have had to have gone with a rootstock that had very fine grained roots and was great at scavenging water. Here on the East Coast, we want exactly the opposite. We want roots that are very coarse and that are not adept at taking up water. There they care a lot about drought
and won't rot.
Won't rot. So it's
roots can rot. A lot of people don't realize that, but
and
roots
then
can rot.
Susceptible to pests too. We have not just phylloxera, but nematodes and all sorts of other, mostly insects in the soil that you've got to find a rootstock that works with it. There's also, like in the American South, once you get south of like Tennessee, you have to worry about something called Pierce's disease. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about it here, but it's even a little bit of a threat in the southern part of Virginia. So they have to find cultivars and rootstocks that work with that. So it's
that are hardier.
Yep.
And with regard to the different diseases or the pests that are
That's right.
And that when you find those things, that's less sides, as you say, less pesticides, less herbicides. Well, that's pretty wild. So, and that's one of the things that I guess people don't realize is everybody talks about Napa Valley in the United States. So Napa Valley is the big place where all the really cool wines are, and you can go on and on, and they're expensive and they're really good, and people don't realize what makes that happen. The ground is good, it's fertile, it produces good grapes, but it doesn't produce a ton. They don't have a lot of yield, so therefore they have this really great wine, but they can't produce a lot of it from an acre, which means they charge higher because the cost to do, to put a bottle of wine together is a lot more. But the bottle of wine is that much better as well in some cases. So, there's all these different nuances that you have to look at with regard to, like you were mentioning earlier, with the weather, the terroir, and all that. So, all right, so when we talk about the grapes, we talk about yield. When let's talk about the harvest. Yeah. Because it's a big deal when you harvest. I mean, we actually played around with, all right, when are we gonna have this podcast? because it was during, during that harvest season.
Yeah.
So we had to actually figure out, okay, when are the grapes going to get harvested? And how early can we actually schedule that because of the harvest? And
yeah, I'd say it's the most important decision you make as a wine grower is, on a yearly basis. Obviously, probably the most impactful decision you make is what you grow. But beyond that, on an operational or yearly basis, the most important decision you make is when to harvest, because there's an optimum window for almost all these grapes. It's at most within a 10-day window, and can you make wine outside of that window? For sure, but we're all trying to maximize the potential of our wine, and it's at most 10 days. I'd say in a lot of cases it's less than that. If you got a storm coming, you get into some really difficult trade-offs. Do I pick it early?
So it's hurricane season.
It's hurricane. We deal with that significantly here. So do I pick it early and maybe have a wine that's more acidic and a little lower in alcohol? Maybe the phenolics aren't quite as mature, so it's not quite as sophisticated, but it's really clean fruit coming in here. They don't have to worry about, getting a moldy tasting wine downstream because it came in with a bunch of rotten fruit or something like that as a result of a rain.
Exactly.
A big part of it too is for each of those cultivars or varietals is do they develop varietal character early? Like Sauvignon Blanc is a variety. I don't grow it here anymore because it has a lot of rot problems, but it's a varietal that develops a lot of character that you would typically expect from that wine early on. So it's a grape you can pick early and still have a wine that resembles Sauvignon B.
Less.
Yeah, it still tastes pretty.
Less risk.
Less risk. But then you've got others. Thankfully, Petit Verdot is a grape you can hang a long time here because it's so thick-skinned. But you have to hang it a long time here. If you pick it early, it's just real.
You got nothing.
It's just bulky. It's a Tannenbaum. If you don't let it hang, you don't get those blueberries and all that fruit profile, and you just got something that's just a big tastes. Tastes like coffee, but that can be good. I mean, we do have people that's what they want, but it's just a big Tannenbaum.
But there's nothing like a really good Petit Verdot.
Yeah, but it has to hang. Really. But thankfully it can hang. But I've learned. You just got to let it do it. Then others are a lot more dicey. You get into Riesling or Gruner or some of those varietals, and you get into some really tough calls.
That window.
Yeah, and the weather and all that stuff. So it's tough.
Yeah. And of course, it's always the exact same calendar days, right?
Well, and then there's the practicality of all this stuff, which is, can you get your crews out here to harvest? I mean, it's not like you just got a lot of people just waiting for you to call them to come out here and pick grapes.
They're on call, aren't they?
For some modest, hourly wage. I mean, it doesn't work that way. So a big part of it is when picking crews are available. And so there's just that, as much as, when you watch a wine show on TV, they'll act like, oh, we just timed it down to the right. This is bullshit. It doesn't work that way. I mean, they've got crews they bring in from Africa to harvest all that stuff, and they're going from winery to winery to winery. So a huge part of it is when can you get people out there to do it?
Yeah, and if the winery is big enough that they can demand when they get their crews.
Yeah, or keep them busy for a few days. But it's if you want to pull that up or push that back, it can get tough. Conversely, I've seen a lot of wineries that didn't want to commit to a date, and then they're sitting there holding the bag, and they've got fruit hanging out there because they wouldn't commit to a date with the picking crews. And then they can't get pickers because all of a sudden maybe you had some rain, which backed up the crews, and so they're running behind, and on and on and on. So there's a logistical element to this business that is again, you'll never see that on a wine show. But a big part of what I like to talk about here is let's get to the real truth. I mean, let's cut through the shit and get to what really goes on in this business, and that's a big part of it too.
Yeah. So and I joked about it earlier about so it's always the same exact 10 calendar days, but the reality of it is that window floats back and forth.
It does. We switch
every year.
We'll swap varietals sometimes, but we got some stuff that's super predictable. PV will be the last one we pick every year.
yeah, because
it's going to be at the end, and
you can,
by about the 15th year, every year, whatever happens in between. April 15th and October 15th, by the time you get to October 15th, your growing season's over. So you might as well just pick it then. I mean, there's no, you're not going to get anything else by hanging another 10 or 15 days other than it's just going to start to drop.
So how does the frost affect it? I mean, because if you're not doing ice wine.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing where I'll give you guys an insight into what really goes on in this industry. Not much. I mean, you'll watch a show. Oh my God, the frost is coming. We got to go pick us. Doesn't matter much. I mean, you need those frosts for ice wine, but if you have a frost, I mean, at that point the vine is going to stop producing. You burnt the leaves, but you've you still got a week or two to get the fruit off of there before. Yeah, I mean, I could go out there right now and find a cluster somebody missed that tastes really good, and it's still out there.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
but
Okay.
you don't have to. I've seen people just on shows go, "Oh my God, the frost is coming."
So
It's not that big a deal.
as a consumer, I don't have to panic if I see a frost and you haven't picked yet.
No,
which is
frosts
good.
are killer in the spring. That's
Oh, right.
because
Yeah.
then you have the potential to destroy the
buds.
the buds.
Yeah.
and then you don't get wine, and so then that has a that is for real. But frost at the end of the season is not a big deal.
And that's really bad when you have an incredibly warm February and March, and then all of a sudden you have a late season frost.
And we never have that here.
No, I'm pretty sure it's every year.
Exactly. Well, this place is the worst. And then, the other thing you get into there too is that, not to digress, but your vines start taking up water. So it's not even just the buds. Your trunks at that point are very susceptible to freezes, and you can get trunk damage too, which manifests itself in a virus called crown gall, which will ultimately kill the vine over the course of 3 or 4 years. So it won't kill it that day.
Right.
But if you get yourself in a really hard freeze, after those vines have hydrated, you'll 2, 3, 4 years down the road, you're going to be replanting every one of them.
Wow. Yeah. And how do you know that has happened?
The trunk starts to swell and crack.
Oh, okay. And you can see
the trunk starts to rot. And it doesn't affect the fruit. In fact, if anything, it actually intensifies the fruit flavor. Some of the best fruit that I picked is off of vines that are dying because they're putting everything they can into their offspring.
The fruit. Yeah. Oh, wow.
So it can be, it's a bittersweet thing. It can be the fruit that comes off those.
So a couple of years you might have great yield, and then you're done. You got to replace it.
Then they're dead. It's kind of like I don't know, like a salmon swimming upstream. They'll get there and deposit the eggs, but they'll die.
Yeah. If the bear doesn't get them, they'll just die anyway, right?
Exactly.
Wow, that's crazy. So we've talked about. We haven't talked about fermentation yet.
Yeah, this gets into the winemaking, which obviously I do some of that here. We've got a consulting winemaker too that calls a lot of the big shots. But this is where you really get into a realm of wild variants, meaning that there's so many different things you can do. You can ferment in stainless, you can ferment in oak, you can ferment in concrete, you can probably missing something.
Stainless with oak.
Yeah,
inside. I've seen that before.
You bet, absolutely.
So it's like crazy. You're going to get the blend of both in a way, or you can start it in stainless and finish it in oak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that happens a lot. Especially with reds and something like a Chardonnay, you'd almost always finish in an oak.
Exactly.
But you can ferment them in an oak too, and it kind of creates a roundness. And I don't do that much here, but because it's just not quite the style that I'm going for.
Right.
But
it's a different. It's a different
taste. There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying there's a style.
It's just a different taste.
We'll talk about consumer preference at the end. I know what I like, and I know what our consumers like and expect from us. That's a big thing is you want to have a level of consistency, for the consumer in terms of style.
Yeah, exactly.
But we do a lot in stainless here. Obviously, we've got tanks and tanks and tanks.
That's what's behind us.
And then, but a big part of that too is why it's stainless, because you can do temperature control. I don't know if you can see it here; these are all sweating. It's because we're doing cold stabilization, which I'll talk about in a bit. But these all have cooling jackets on them, and we can control the fermentation temperature, and that controls for reds. It controls how much extraction you get from the skins, which impacts color and tannin. Positively, lower or higher, depending on what you're hotter.
Right.
Hotter means more color, more tannin. Cooler means less color, less tannin.
So we've been to, and I know you guys have as well, been to some wineries in other countries, in particular like Spain and France and Italy, and a lot of their production, a lot of their process is underground. Which allows them to have maintain a
yes, we think
very
about it
stable.
because they've been doing it down there for several generations before they had refrigeration. So this is their poor man's way of keeping it cold.
And the concrete tanks. I mean, I've seen some concrete tanks.
Those are really popular in Europe. I don't like using them much here because they're hard to clean. Because you got all that porous concrete and one of the things that's key. We don't have it on the list.
Can't use bleach to clean your concrete.
No, dude, you can't do that at all.
That would be ugly.
But you got to so much of making a good wine is proper sanitation. And look, I'm not dissing people that use concrete, but I'm just saying it's really hard to keep clean.
It is because when you leave wine in the
on that, which is perfectly fine, but then you don't have
it takes away from the concrete.
Then you might as well be in stainless or a plastic container,
Exactly.
so that you don't get that. you don't get that minerality, and that there's oxygen exchange with that concrete. It's like a barrel in a sense. It's porous. Liquid cannot go out, but oxygen can permeate, and so that's the advantage of it. But as I say, and again, I'm not dissing concrete fermented wines. I don't do it because
it's a little bit of it's a different process. So
yeah, sometimes you get a funky wine. I mean, like here,
exactly.
Again, our consumers learn to expect a really crisp, dry, really clear, clean.
And the consistency with
stainless is the only way to go. But the reds all go to a barrel.
Yeah,
I
mean, but that's after it starts there, and then it goes to the barrel, and the process is at the point where you don't have to worry about, whereas with concrete, you're always having. I mean,
but it's funny with these barrels. There's a big battle between myself and our consulting winemaker. He loves to use new oak because there's nothing's been in that and given it time for some bacteria to be lurking in there. But if you use all new oak, it's going to be pretty oaky, and so you have to balance. You just can't use new barrels.
It's really heavy, and wait, inside the barrel you can have light, medium, or heavy toast.
And variations of all those pluses and minuses and long.
We should talk about what toast is. Toast is when they burn the inside of the barrel,
and you can toast the heads, which is the round part, not just the staves, which are the body or not, and. Oh my God, that's a whole podcast on barrels and the type of wood.
Maybe we should do that. Yeah,
you've got American, French, Hungarian, even other more. Some other regions are starting to produce wood too. But the three big ones.
Yeah, exactly. But people don't realize how, it's just a wine barrel. Yeah. And then how many times do you use it? Because you can't really go that many times.
Well, it depends on how funky you want your wine. I mean, after about 3 years, 3 seasons, that barrel's going to get
You get
funky.
3 seasons, and then you give it to the bourbon maker.
Exactly.
Because they love that.
But that yeast selection is another big deal too. You can start with. A lot of times we'll start with an indigenous yeast. The grapes come in with yeast on the skins that Mother Nature provided. Sometimes if we've let those grapes hang a long time, it's already starting to it's already fermenting before it ever even gets in here. It's like fermenting on the vine.
Oh yeah.
And but then we'll introduce yeast because you want it to finish. If the yeasts are weak, you have the risk of producing an inadvertently a sweet wine where the yeast did not process all the sugar and alcohol, which is, again, that's not what your consumer is expecting. That's a huge issue. And so we introduce yeast. Most winemakers, they think yeast selection is everything. But UC Davis, nobody likes me to tell people, they hate it when I remind winemakers of this, but like UC Davis did a study 3 years ago, and they went to like 100 different wineries and sampled like 1,000 different fermentation batches. And on average, the average fermentation has at least 5 strains active, and that's because you've got the yeast you introduced. You didn't probably kill all the indigenous yeast. Your commercial yeast is supposed to crowd that out. It never does. You've got all these other yeast because you're not using the same yeast for all your wines. Every wine we have has a different yeast selection designed to optimize that, that varietal can bring to the table, so to speak. But all that stuff gets in the air, and it gets in all these other fermentations too. So there's no stopping that. And so winemakers think, it's this yeast, and it's in there, but there's going to be probably on average 4 other ones, and they're doing stuff too.
Wow.
So, but it does matter. Look, we played around with it here, and I will say that really strong commercial yeast that you introduce into that wine versus the yeast that come indigenously or through the air. That's your primary yeast. It will have an impact on flavor profile.
So that's to augment the fermentation process, because it'll happen on its own in some.
Oh yeah, for sure. Just mainly make sure it finishes strong, and you have different. Some will ferment faster and hotter. So again, it gets back to tannin and color extraction. You want a hot. If you're looking for, something like Franc, which you're drinking right now. You need to run that fast and hot to get a wine of that color. Otherwise, you're going to get a wine that's got something that looks a lot more like a rosé if you just let it ferment on its own. And that's not necessarily bad, but again, the consumer, they hear that Cabernet and they're thinking it's the father of Cabernet Sauvignon, and they're thinking a bigger, bolder wine. And so you definitely want to maximize the extraction from it. But if you didn't, you'd make a pale wine that would be similar to a cold climate Pinot Noir.
Yeah, so
which is not bad. I'm just saying neither is bad. Both are good, but it's just a matter of what the consumer expects. And what you want to make, what you as a winemaker want to make.
Right.
What you like, or what I like.
Yeah, so that's crazy if you think of that. You went dark?
Yeah.
All right, check up top. Yeah.
I'm good. I'm
All
good.
right. Yeah. So I don't know what goes on.
I just said something he didn't like, and so
technology. I cut him off. Yeah.
he said, "Guy, why did I invite him on my show?"
Yeah. No, that's all good. That's all good. So a lot of people don't realize that all these things go into it. There's a lot of chemistry that you.
It's all huge. Food,
when you talk about science.
Yeah. No, here in the winery, this is all food science and chemistry. A little bit of art. There's a little bit of art of trying to say, but it's like with baking. The art is more about trying to anticipate what will make the good wine, and then the scientific decisions will yield a very predictable outcome. But it's more about that the art is in determining what outcome you want.
So you take samples and you run them through the lab. Yeah. To make sure that the wine is progressing as it should be progressing.
Oh yeah, we take samples twice a day. We measure how fast the sugar is being converted to alcohol. Obviously, we stay on top of the temperature. All these tanks have gauges. We're also checking at the top of the tank where the fermentation happens at the very top.
Because the temperature's different.
Yeah, because it'll be colder down here.
Yeah.
Typically, unless it's a really slow fermentation. But yeah, we're doing all that stuff every day for sure. And before we start, we're looking at acidity and we're looking at sugar levels. If it's been a wet, cold year and sugar levels are low, we use a technique called chaptalization, which the French pioneered about 150 years ago, which is to add sugar to the must before you start, which will up alcohol levels. That's a tried and true technique. Everybody.
Yeah. So if you want
everybody in the cold, the French do it. They don't have to do it anymore in a really hot year. We don't either in a hot year, but in a cold year like 2018, you got to do it. Unless you want a low alcohol wine. It is rare for us to adjust acidity. Sometimes when it comes in, again, if it's rained a lot, it will dilute the juice in the wine, which will bring the pH higher, which means higher pH means lower acids. If you remember back to your high school chemistry, and sometimes we want to bring the pH down because at a higher pH level you have the potential for spoilage. The lower the pH level, you have less bacteria.
There you go.
We don't, but if you have to do that every year, you're probably growing the wrong grape.
Right, exactly.
Because you shouldn't have to be intervening that much.
Yeah, exactly. So you get the system down, the process down, and you can work it through the process, and it's.
But when you're in an environment like ours where weather's unpredictable, you have to have a few tools in your belt.
Yeah, and then finally the last lab test is the empirical data, by which you test it personally.
Yeah, personal lab.
Which is what you were drinking. You were drinking right out of
but we alcohol level is one of the last tests that we do because that has to be accurate for the label. Otherwise, you get in trouble with Tax and Trade Bureau department of the ATF.
Go figure. Can you get in trouble for having it less alcohol than?
No, it has to be accurate. And it's not about less or more than accurate. It needs to be accurate.
So what's the tolerance? What's the level of tolerance?
0.5%.
Okay, so that's all right. So it's
no, they're reasonable. I mean, look, hey, frankly, if you've done the test, you should know within a tenth. There should be less than 1/10% variance, like even a.
And it is nature.
Yeah.
So
they are very generous with their tolerances. You just need to test.
But it has to be there.
It has to be there.
Has to be there. A lot of people don't realize that. You've got a label. It's got to match the label.
Yeah, and thankfully we practice sustainable agriculture here. But if you were in an area where you sprayed a lot of copper over the years, like I was talking about, you have to go get your copper levels tested to make sure they're within a legal limit, and that is a real issue for a lot of vineyards in France.
Yeah.
Less so here because we haven't sprayed as much copper here. So there are other tests you have to do. For us, the final test, just alcohol.
Wow.
But before we get to that though, there's a lot of filtering that we do. We use something called a cross flow filter now, which is it separates chunky particles out, using like osmosis. So we do that because the consumer does not like wine that's real cloudy.
So in the engineering field, we call those suspended solids.
Yeah, you got to get those out of there.
You got to get them out. Yeah.
You want that clear wine. I like it without it, but like
it can go either way, right?
Go ask Sarah. How well a consumer likes something that's cloudy.
They
do not
don't
like it.
They don't.
And you can't sell that.
I filter the honey.
Yeah, exactly.
I filter the honey to get the wax and the B parts out. Some people like it, but most people don't.
That's it. And then we are also doing something now called cold filtration, and that is getting the wine cold to replicate the environment in your refrigerator. So if you took a wine bottle home and you stuck it in the fridge for a week, if we didn't do this here, what you would have is a bunch of what we call wine diamonds, which are these little harmless particles, but they look like crystals that form in the bottom of your wine bottle. And that freaks people out because they think it's not safe to drink, but they're completely
Something's
safe.
wrong with my wine.
They're tartrates. It's just it's tartaric acid,
Right.
and it's you can totally eat it. It has no flavor. It has no. It's completely harmless. But if we didn't do that here, we get a bunch of calls.
So it's about the presentation.
I wish as an industry we could get comfortable with that, because you talk about sustainability. We burn a lot of energy doing this. I don't like that. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of electricity to take these wines down to 30 degrees for 3 weeks to do that.
So how about it? Can we get the entire industry to allow less filtration?
I'd love to be able to do that and still sell my wines, because this is just, it's wasted energy. But we have to do it, otherwise you got a wine that people aren't going to want to drink. The average person isn't going to want to drink.
That's true, unfortunately. Yeah, so those, have a different levels of filtration and different types of filtration.
Sometimes we don't filter reds. Sometimes we don't filter because reds.
They're so dark.
They're so dark.
You can't tell anyway.
And why mess with a good thing? A lot of times those suspended solids actually really enhance the flavor and the mouthfeel. So we've done some unfiltered. And that's actually really that's very common to buy a red wine that has not been filtered. I would say that if you went to a grocery store, 20 or 30% of that wine has probably not been filtered.
Okay. So I've had actually some Sauvignon Blanc that was unfiltered.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
A little cloudy.
I bet it was pretty good though, right?
It was really good.
Because you have that mouthfeel. It coats your mouth. It's the viscosity is.
It was delicious.
Is enhanced. If I was making them for myself, I'd never filter one.
Yeah. I mean, it was crazy because you're looking at it and you're thinking, this does not look like the normal Sauvignon Blanc. No. And I'm like, but it really tastes good.
It does. It does.
Which is crazy, because if you think that the filtering actually can potentially remove flavor.
That's why you have to be real careful with it. When we run them through filtering, we'll take some samples like right up front, before much of the batch goes through there, to make sure we don't feel like we're taking too much of it out. Depending on what filtering machine you're using, there are different levels of filtration you can use. So we play around with that some, but
right.
So you can play, but I prefer not to filter at all. But we do mostly we do.
Okay, so it's marketing.
Yeah, it all comes down to
marketing.
Look, to do what we love to do here.
Now we just hit consumer preference.
Well, to do what we love to do here, we have to be able to sell this stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess I could always be a home winemaker, but that doesn't amount to much of a business.
This is not typically the gear that you would have to be a home winemaker.
So, you have to have something you have to make a wine that you're proud of, that you're excited about, that you have a passion for.
Exactly.
But you got to find a wine that other people are passionate about too. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with a lot of wine. So that's
is okay. But then it's like when I used to have a kegerator.
Yeah.
I used to have a kegerator, and when I went to sell it, the guy was like, "Well, what's wrong with it?" And I'm like, "Nothing's wrong with it." He goes, "Well, then why are you selling it?" I said, "Because every time I get a keg, you got to take it down in a certain period of time.
Yeah.
You got to drink it in a certain period of time." And all my drinking buddies left, so I didn't have as many drinking buddies, and so I was running around for like 2 weekends in a row, just trying to take the thing down. And I'm like, I couldn't get anything done around the house. So, it's the same thing. You want to sell it, you want to make it.
I want people to enjoy the wine. I mean, a big part of the reward for me is when I see people enjoying my wine, whether it's here at the winery or we go to a local restaurant, and it's just so flattering. When somebody's taking a bottle out, the highest compliment anybody ever gave me, and this is funny, I won't tell you who it is, and I won't even tell you the varietal, but he said, "Oh, that varietal, blah blah blah." He said, "That's my favorite wine." He said, "That's what I drink at Christmas with Christmas dinner." And I was like, "Man, what the ultimate?" I didn't even think that was our best wine, but like for him, that was the best wine that we made, and he knows all of our wines, he's had them all, but he chose our wine for his Christmas dinner. And when somebody does that, like, that just means the world. So, there's, we talk so much of sustainability is given back, right? We talked about that last time. And like, when you provide that to those people, you provide that service. I mean, they pay for, I appreciate they do pay for, they buy it, But I'm just saying, like, that's our contribution back to, you don't do this for the money. There's not much money in this, but that's our kind of what I like to think of as our contribution back to the community here. And that really means something.
And ergo, the consumer preference, that person's preference was a specific bottle of wine. They have it for one of the most important events of their year. Yeah. And that's the wine that they feature, that is a compliment. Yeah. And I really think that's great. I mean, it's one of those things where, people look at, ultimately, I think you opened the session. Ultimately, what is a good wine? Good wine's whatever wine you like.
That's right.
However, that's just the way it is. So when you're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, what is a really good wine? We talked about all the things that go into a good wine, but you've got to like that wine in order for you to drink it. Why are you going to buy a bottle of $50 bottle of wine if you don't like it? Yeah, nobody's going to do that.
That's why I always tell people, drink what you like. Don't anybody else tell you you should drink this or that or whatever. Try all those things, but drink what you like.
Yeah. And I think, that's the good part about 1723 is 1723 offers a pretty good variety of varietals, so there's
try and mix it up. We mix it up.
Different things available, that you can get that have really good white wines and rosés and red wines. So, when you're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, so, which one do you prefer? And so you make things that a bunch of, people who come in here, almost everybody can find a wine that they like.
Try to. And we mix it up a little bit every year, too, in terms of the styles. This year we made a rosé out of the Chamberson, which I'd never done before. I'm going to be making this every year from here on out because it turned out really good.
But, I had some 2 weeks ago. It was phenomenal.
You have to. But anyway, I think it is. We'll see how it sells. It may not sell. If it doesn't, then I'll go back to making it as a red wine, which sells great. But you just never know, right? I mean, it's part of the process you work through here.
It's every year. Every year is a new year. Every year you get to experiment a little bit more, and there's your trial and error, and that's how that works. So, cool. We good to go?
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on here.
Yeah. Thank you. So we're going to be meeting again, I think, in January. We haven't set the date yet, but we may try something new. So we started another podcast, myself and another gentleman, called Tipsy Tagalongs, and I think we'll be introducing that along with Ben, and we're going to do an actual wine tasting.
Yeah.
Here at the table, and then we'll expand from that, but. Until then, hey, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your being here with us. This has been American Wine Journey, hosted by Journey More Often and 1723 Vineyards. You can find us you can find us both 1723 Vineyards
on Facebook and etc.
American. Then journeymoreoften.today and .com.
Go there first.
And we're going to be around for a while. So thanks for joining us. And as always, enjoy life. Journey more often. Thanks, everybody.